Thank you for joining us here at Trillium. We are going to have our next panel. We would be discussing mobility as a service, getting nowhere without trusted data. And we have three esteemed gentlemen here going to talk about this in depth. I'd like to introduce Zoran and Kehler, who's going to take it away. Thank you.
I'm on? Okay, so good morning, everybody. It is a pleasure to have you all here and be present when we are discussing the topic that I have somewhat jokingly called mobility as a service, getting nowhere without trusted data. The data is at the center of the equation because not only you have to have it available, you have to have trust in your data so that the systems that you are planning and building are getting good input information. Right? So today with us we have Cornelius Bittersohl, the manager of technology consulting at P3 Group. And we have Derrick, Chief Technology Officer at Trillium Secure. Good morning, Cornelius.
Thank you very much.
Yikes, good morning.
Will you tell us a little bit about the practice that you're leading at P3 Group?
Yeah, absolutely. So P3 is a worldwide consulting and engineering company that serves primarily the automotive market, but also aviation, telecommunication, and energy markets. So we combine those four major worlds together because they obviously, connected with each other as well. And we also able to combine those worlds together to identify best practices for connectivity solutions from a plane to a car to the mobile device or telecommunication network. And obviously we also very integrated into the cybersecurity world where we do consulting. Where should, for example, an automotive company put their focus on how to protect their, let's say, their infrastructure, but also their assets, their products, and then also help them implementing the technical solutions that are actually realizing the whole protection level for their vehicles or other applications that they may use for connecting the passenger with their cloud system, for example.
So John, that really sounds as if P3 Group is covering all the bases that we know about, but that are not necessarily on our straight path, right? Those are the stakeholders and pieces of the business with an automotive company or an end customer that ultimately we have to address as we build a part of this mobility as a services ecosystem.
Yeah, I think the first thing we need to do is just kind of, well, what's the problem, right? And we're talking about security, we're talking about trust. It really comes down to, what is it that we have? What is it that we have as consumers, passengers, owners of vehicles, right? We have data, we have location, we have information about the systems as they're driving. These are all very, very personal pieces of information. Not only is it personal information you can pull out of it, like where have you been, what have you been doing, that sort of thing, right? But also it's information that's going to go from the cloud into the connected car, and then that's where we actually get into the trust aspect, right? Is a system set up to receive, to communicate with the outside world in a way where things don't go haywire?
But it's also very important to mention that we as a consumer, we buy the product, the vehicle or an application, or at least we use it. So we put the trust into this company, whichever OEM it is, to protect us whenever we use the car. And it should not be the case that I drive around, I have a best connectivity to stream my video to the infotainment system, but suddenly somebody deactivates the braking system.
Because you have connectivity.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the other set of things. Yeah, we want this kind of connectivity and we want to have data available at all time as we have with our smartphone. But we also expect that when we pay this quite amount of money for getting a new car, that somebody thinks ahead and protects us even after we bought the car and gets us updated or protects us over and over.
But that is an interesting discussion because you come after, you come across those studies where they will say that 50, 60x a percentage of people never use the advanced features in the vehicle, right? So if it's infotainment, they will tend to use it, but if it's anything related to safety or even advanced driver assistance systems, they will not do that. And I think there is a reluctance on the part of the OEMs to introduce more because they see this kind of interesting barrier to adoption of those features, even though they provide convenience for us. I mean, what is your impression as P3 basically team talks to the manufacturers and kind of it's behind the scenes from we see as consumers, right?
So it's definitely that the OEMs are competing with each other to every year bring a new version of the autonomous braking system out, or make it more precise, or make it more reliable, or have a much more automated parking experience, and so on. But as you said, most of the customers, they don't even realize that they bought this kind of feature. So they have this feature present, but they also have those other features for infotainment that are much more, I would say, visible in the view of the customers, because they interact with it on a daily basis, actually at the end. So it's a lot of features are not really known by the customers. It's somewhere hidden in a magic box, and it only comes to foreground when it doesn't work, or it becomes into an accident situation, for example.
So John, in terms of trust, what is the meaning of trust to you? I mean, you have brought interesting and very comprehensive experience to Trillium when you joined us, and a lot of that has gone into our strategic planning and product definitions. Right? What does trust mean to a consumer? What does it mean to an enterprise that's using the data? What does it mean for the car manufacturer? What is the real and what is the implicit trust?
Sure. So the definitions vary, right? Because the definitions vary based on who you are as a consumer of that data, the relationship with what's going on. As a consumer, if I'm in my autonomous vehicle, trust to me means that the car is not going to get hacked, right? That it's going to do what it's supposed to do, and information about myself is not going to leak to the rest of the world. But fundamentally, the first area of trust there is that you're going to have an experience that's very much like getting on an airplane. You trust the pilot with your life, right? You trust that the mechanics, the plane's working properly, and you trust it. When you think about it in terms of an automobile or a vehicle, the key aspect is this going to do what it's supposed to do, right? So is there any issues around new software updates getting put in the system that aren't trustworthy? Right? Is there any issues around viruses, intrusion attacks, denials of service that might occur? Those are all the kind of security-related, IT security-related trust issues. In addition to that, that trust, of the data, what's going to be used with the data, really has to be tied to that vehicle, right? And so this is important from the commercialization of vehicular data, right? In that the information that's coming up to the cloud for financial purposes, for machine learning, for AI, to come up with new algorithms, behavior analysis, that sort of thing, those pieces of information really have to be known. Where did they come from? Are they valid information? Who was the driver, right? And in doing all of that, still maintaining privacy, right? Still kind of cleansing the data of any personal identifiable information. And so that's really what we've had to do. That's what we've set out to do. To kind of cover all of those in a way that's comprehensive, but also compatible with people's sharing and the people's ability to trust other organizations, other entities.
So, yeah, please.
I also would like to add that maybe 5-10 years ago, we collected data at every company without thinking, how do we store that? I mean, we store them somewhere that we can access them, but how do we store them from a strategic perspective? How do we control who get access to it? What happens to the data if they get stolen? And can somebody just steal one part and he needs the other part to connect the real personal identifiable information? So I think what happened also with especially in the European Union with the GDPR regulatory announcement, or it's actually law right now, that the companies are forced now to, cover all bases from the vehicle to the app, everything that's in between. Every time they cooperate with a third party provider to provide a better service for example, parking lots finding, they have to make sure that this partner is also organizing the data. Exactly, yeah. And they have to check with them. Kind of like when you have when you buy a tire from a supplier, every time you make a visit in their plant to see are they producing the tire in an environment that is actually making a good product, or
but
is it something?
It is a really interesting, it is a really interesting problem. If you remember the years when XML was introduced, right? XML was introduced to allow the data to be exchanged over demarcation points, over the interfaces, and to basically announce, hey, listen, I'm sending you this, right? To what extent has GDPR sunk in, so to speak, with the companies, right? Will that parking provider know what you're asking them to do, what is expected of them? Is there a common sheet of music that they're playing from, or is it still kind of largely the work of progress?
Sorry, yeah, actually, I'll take that one if it's okay. Actually, my second startup was actually based around XML. And now today it would be JSON data, so, but same essential thing. But the self-advertisement, the self-definition of this is what I need, this is what I'm asking for, that's very much in the cloud service, the APIs that, we provide in the market and the industry needs. And asking the right question, right, for the interface so that the provider of that data then provides the right information, just the answers, the truth, nothing but the truth and nothing more, right, is kind of what they need to offer back. And it's not just technology, there's also disciplines and audits that companies need to do to protect that data.
What are you seeing with the OEMs, right? Because they are they are the hub of that kind of ecosystem. And the privacy as an area is developing. The monetization and utilization of the data from the vehicle is developing, and we don't see any standards, right? Everybody is coming forward with definitions, right? We know the challenges that the OEMs have even in producing the vehicles, right? They're largely in the position of being a system integrator, right? But mechanically, you know what to deal with. But this is a whole new ballgame. And what are you seeing in your practice, talking on the business and the strategy side with these companies?
So virtually every OEM, as well as their suppliers, as well as then adjacent companies like engineering service providers like us, they think about, okay, what does cybersecurity means for us? Obviously, this OEM at the end is much more exposed. Right. Because he sells the car. If something goes wrong, he's in charge for either repairing it or at first prevent that something happens. We saw the FCA hack, I would call it, like, was it 4 years ago? It's quite some time ago, which basically opened the public eye on this topic, opened the legal eye or the legislator eye on this topic as well, which is good because it could become a very substantial issue if nobody thinks ahead and everybody does something here and there and nobody has a certain guideline where they can react to. That's important. Before that, we already had security. Created the side pass to go to a software piece that wasn't supposed to be open. But it's still something that has to be, it's a living process at the end. Same with IT cybersecurity. The software or the technology introduced 5 years ago is maybe not, there are certain base technologies that are still relevant, like SSL, but also gets improved year over year or month over month, and it's not just like one single bullet. So and also not one single solution on the process or the organization side. So that's another big topic, that you have to have this mindset. When I design an electronic system that is now hyper connected, where all these different vulnerabilities could come from, how do I make sure that I use the right technology, as well as how do I make sure that I validate this in the correct way after I develop the implementation, for example.
And an interesting problem that I see there, or a challenge, and I'll move to you afterwards, is that you have this very complicated ecosystem, right? And it cannot move forward by pure evolution, right? Tesla can be the Galapagos Island, right, of the industry, but everybody else has to catch up. I mean, are we waiting for a trigger, for a catalyzer, right? Is there something that will happen that is equal to the launch of the iPhone, right, and then the Android platform, right, that has pulled forward the mobile entertainment and the content industry? I mean, is something like that going to happen with automotive so that monetization and security come to the fore?
So I think there's two aspects, right? One is you ask, if there's going to be some event that's going to drive certain behaviors or certain changes. I would actually argue that event has already happened.
Yeah.
But but in a parallel industry, even in the IT space, you have like a Marriott hack, for example, right? Hundreds of millions of people's data is exposed and had been exposed for years. Right.
But the challenge that you have there is that what the military calls left of boom, right of boom. There have been so many booms that the people are getting desensitized, right, to that. I mean, it's like, yet another.
Right. But my point being that would we feel comfortable with an analogous situation where we have essentially 100 million cars that are being tracked and have other people's code coming in and out of it at will? And the answer is absolutely not.
Yeah.
Right?
Because of a fairly short connection between security and safety.
Exactly.
Right?
It's not a financial safety issue, it's a physical safety issue.
Right.
And also the example of the Marriott hack, it's not a life-threatening problem for myself. Maybe I stayed in the Marriott, I don't know if I was affected or not. Yeah. I can call my credit card company and say, like, you know what, there's a payment that I didn't authorize, just book it back, and they say, like, yeah, of course, no problem. It's a different thing for a vehicle that is a 2-ton
thing that can cause damage to yourself and the others.
Right. We can't call back and say, well, there was a left turn into traffic I didn't want to take. I want to take it back. Right. So this is the kind of critical difference and issue. Right. And so that's why it's so critically important.
Yeah. And the mass of the vehicle is also the inertia of the problem itself. You have to think much way ahead to implement something, to think it through. Is it really secure? Obviously, it can still happen that somebody finds a new vulnerability. It's the part of the game. But it's because it's such a 2-ton or maybe 2.5-ton thing, you can't just store them somewhere on the streets and say, like, well, we've tried to come up with a solution, but it might take
it didn't really work.
Yeah.
Are you seeing in the interfacing with the OEMs as well as the other companies in the ecosystem, to what extent are there regional differences? And I ask this question because the feedback we got in several cases from talking to the OEMs local to the States, liability would come to the front. Why are you doing this? It's because we want to mitigate the risk of a recall, right? We want to fight it on the financial front, fight it on the other, we want to mitigate how is that different by market, right, that you guys are present in?
So the liability question obviously here is much more prone because of the potential impact on the financial side for this company that didn't react or was at least found guilty to not react or not think ahead quick enough. But it's also changing in the European Union that they become much more, I would say, active on this side as well, that if you provide a product, you have to make sure that it's safe enough over time and provide updates, provide incremental additions to maintain the same safety or security level that you promised the customer at the vehicle purchase date. What we also see that every OEM here in the US, in Europe, as well as in, for example, in China, they all think about the same problem. How do we prevent it? But it's then also very, I would say, localized because a BMW gets engineered in Munich, not here in the US, the same as the Tesla gets here engineered and not in Munich, for example. So you have to make sure that the talent or the technology is also available then in those kind of areas where those vehicles get engineered or designed. In China, there's a lot of ecosystem building up suddenly very fast. It also has to be seen which mixture of the ecosystem is really bringing a really good solution out of onto the road, for example. Yeah. But every OEM is working on it, like I said before. It's just maybe they have the same goal, but they take maybe 3 different paths, like every other company selects, for example, this technology for the sensor over this, but at the end they have the same goal, I would say.
Right, and the big guys, you also have situations where they will have the same vehicle engineered differently here in the States and made in the States than the one that's made over there, right? For example, in Europe or their home markets. So it is an additional challenge that the companies in our space have to deal with. I mean, it's
Yeah.
right.
But also the communication inside the departments, because you have hundreds of thousands of parts. They are sourced or designed by thousands of different people in departments that maybe you talk to each other on a very seldom basis, because it's just too much other stuff going on right now. So they have to also work on that as well, that they think in the same way.
John, in many industries you've been with, and myself as well, industry makes a lot of money when disruptive moments happen, right? I was in mobile telecommunications, right? Anytime we went from N to N plus 1G, lots of people made money several years before and several years after. What are the disruptive things in automotive that we hope to benefit from and also bring the benefit to the market and the consumers and as well as the industry?
Sure. So there's going to be, there's going to be a lot of autonomous activity. There's already obviously a lot of autonomous attention, right? A lot of focus. It's going to take probably a while for all those cars to actually start rolling. Connected cars are happening right now, but there's not necessarily a lot of true value, as much value, right, as should be with a connected vehicle. And I'll circle back to that. And of course, you've got electric, right? Electric vehicles or other fuels. But coming back to the connected one for just a moment, I think the biggest change that's going to take in terms of the industry and why we're doing what we're doing at Trillium, right, is that this thing that you call a vehicle, this thing you call a car, whether it's an autonomous vehicle or not, right, it collects and consumes a massive amount of information, a massive amount of data, right? And today's connectivity that we have in vehicles is really minor. And the reason it's very minor is because if you can't trust the data, like absolutely trust the data, the integrity of the information, coming down, or the data that you're sending up, then you have to limit what you do with that data, right? You have to limit what you do with those IT services. And so once that problem gets solved, right, then the car almost becomes an extension of the cloud. It becomes an extension of software, services, functionality coming in and out of that from different companies, from different stakeholders, right? So very similar to other solutions, other systems like phones or even connected computers and everything else. Some of that information will be financial, some will be location, some will be personal preferences. All kinds of information can take place. So as an example, you have a connected car. Your car gets into an accident, right? One, it can automatically go tell there was an accident.
Right.
Here, send
As
help.
is mandated in Europe.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So send help. That's already kind of taken care of. But what if, in addition to that, it could also tell you the identity of the occupants? It could tell them about the medical history of the occupants. If they had some type of wearable,
Yeah.
it could actually get things like heartbeat, blood pressure, other information, even before the emergency vehicles arrived. And all the things about insurance, all the things about payments, everything else could already be taken care of as well. But all of that kind of activity requires absolute, complete, immutable trust. It has to be completely
And it goes
trustworthy.
both ways,
And it has
into
to
the
be,
vehicle,
and it has to
outside
be
of the
private,
vehicle,
right? It has to be private. Only the people that you've given access to your information, and only for the purposes of the use of that information in particular instances can that ever be shared. And that's really that framework that we're trying to build. That's what we're kind of trying to do here.
And it's almost one of those situations, you build it and they will come, but who will come to an environment like this? I believe initially are going to be enterprises, right? Because they will see faster the benefit than you personally. So for example, if you are a public transportation system, right, and you can aggregate and mesh the data that shows you what example is, for example, happening on the ground transportation as well as the automotive, as well as, for example, stuff related to weather or anything like that. I mean, we are seeing that with some of the smart city initiatives, such as Singapore, for example, right? That is where it's playing out, where they see the benefit of doing that quickly. So time is of the essence here, right? You have always to remember the fact that the legacy OEMs are still making vehicles on a 3 to 7 year kind of cycle, right?
3 to 5.
Exactly, and data cannot wait for that much. Monetization cannot wait for that much. The cybersecurity cannot wait for that much. So that is obviously something that is hanging over, above all of our heads in this business.
But what we also see in the industry is that the automotive companies become more, I would say, open to other companies with defined interfaces that are protected by, let's say, available IT, cybersecurity technology, but also their own set of technologies where they give you an API access to get the vehicle data. Like a Tesla, you can access the API and you can see how much battery is left over inside your vehicle and other things. So this is happening also more and more, that they understand they can't just solve it for themselves. It's just too complex. You have already today with a telematics solution, you already have you as a consumer, then the OEM who provides the vehicle, then a company that provides the cellular network, a telematics service provider, maybe an application service provider, and then the backend system from the OEM at the end, and maybe some other companies who provide some smaller features here and there for customer experience, for example. So it's
so John,
increasing.
How long do we have to wait for 5G to catch up so that there is ubiquitous connectivity and bandwidth? Because the amounts of data that we are talking about to make something like this realistic surpass by several orders of magnitude what the operators and the OEMs are used to today.
Right. It actually brings up another point, which is, regardless of what we do in the network, we're not always connected, right? You're going to go through a tunnel.
It's not ubiquitous. It's not.
Yeah, you're going to go to a tunnel. You're going to drive through an area where there just is not connectivity, and so whatever solution you have, right, inside the system needs to account for that, needs to adapt to that as well, right? The idea of having a quote autonomous car where all the computation is going in the cloud obviously doesn't work, right? So that's probably the most critical item, but certainly. There's a handshake and a mechanism required there. The other problem, we talked about the design cycles of cars, of vehicles, right? And, that's part of it, right? How long do you wait before you get that next vehicle? But another key part of that is once you've purchased a vehicle, that vehicle is going to be in existence for, a good period of time. Hopefully the service life is, 15, 20 years, right? So at 15, 20 years, the software, the systems, even the screens, right, in your car are going to not be very attractive, right? And so another key part of this is, as electronics, as software interfaces, as user interfaces, the experience for the consumer becomes more about the screen.
And it's a lifestyle.
But more about the screen and less about the steering wheel and the shifter, right? The handle. When that happens, there's a massive pressure, right, on an automotive, manufacturer and all the subsystems of how do I keep this vehicle relevant? How do I prevent my literally the resale value on a car having the same kind of decay that the resale value on a PC has, or a laptop or a phone? Because those things lose almost all of their value in about 3 to 5 years. Certainly doesn't work for a car.
It certainly does not, yeah.
Yeah, but that's why the whole topic over-the-air updates is at the moment a really hot topic, but there's only at the moment really one OEM is actually demonstrating this for cars that are older than 5 years, and that's in this case, for example, the Tesla, which you could have bought a Tesla Model S from 2012 and you still get updates, maybe not the full feature set, but
not
still
everything, because hardware is lacking to a certain extent,
exactly,
but they're still supporting it fully.
And it's certainly part of a strategic decision of an OEM. Do we want to position ourselves as an OEM that provides you continuous updates longer than 3-4 years that are also not just safety related, but also like entertainment related or user experience related. Like Apple, there I see iPhone 4 still walking around or iPhone 5s. I don't see so many Galaxy phones. So you can see those two worlds. It will potentially be the same in the automotive world, that some OEMs will say, this is such a key topic for us. We want to focus on that because we need to have this customer interaction at the end in the long term, because we can hold them to our brand much more effectively than just saying, you know what, your car is now old, buy our new car, for example. So there will be also some kind of shift in the OEM strategies. I think that they will figure out what is the update worth for us as well as for the consumers.
So who do you think is going to pull forward in that case, right? Is it going to be brands like this that are focused on a fairly small slice of the market? I mean, are the big guys going to catch up with the breadth of the portfolio and the market presence that they have? I mean,
my great insight into that is we'll see.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know how you would predict that.
Right.
Yeah, and almost every topics that are now new, like the connected, autonomous, shared, and electric. A lot of OEMs, they became awake, I would say, and now pushing with more resources that they ever seen before into we want to be the first for autonomous level 3, 4 features. So they are hungry to, not get kicked aside from some underdogs from Silicon Valley or from China who haven't been existed or didn't exist 2 years ago, for example. Yeah.
Right.
So a key part of that, right, is, it's not only, hey, this car doesn't have autonomous capability, right? But when you look at the value proposition, there's this massive switch of value proposition from the mechanical, the powertrain, the brand, the style, right, of a vehicle to a software capability, right? Something that an automotive maker, really has never had to contend or struggle with before, right? And so that's a massive shift. And that's part of the reason why I say hard to tell, right? It's hard to predict.
It is.
But I see it myself when I was looking to buy a new car because mine is getting too old. I don't want to buy a car that I know it has already existing issues with advanced features, because I know that they will never get fixed after I bought the car. So I really need a car that I will buy that, has some kind of forward-looking capability, I would say.
But you're a difficult customer, right? We all are, because we deal with them, and we know to a certain extent what to expect, right? I mean, some of the automakers that we have met over here, in Las Vegas at the event, are really forward-thinking. I mean, we met one that is defining the vehicle as a programmable, set of hardware. Right, the vehicle has a gigabit Ethernet ring inside, can do load balancing, right? So in that sense, that is something that me, as myself, right, as a kind of a forward-thinking consumer would want to buy, right? But it needs to be interesting, it needs to be driving the others to step up to that particular paradigm. So that would be everything for ourselves today. This was a really interesting conversation. Cornelius, John, really great insight.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you as
for
well.
the people at the booth over here, and for the people watching us over the live feed, thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure hosting the panel for you.
Thank you very much.